The UCLA Bruins Insider Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Max Dorsey to talk some basketball recruiting along with some football towards the end. So again, thank you, Max, for coming on. But before we get started, I want to thank everyone right now who is tuned in. It means a lot to us. And yeah, let's get right into it. So we haven't really touched on basketball in our last two meetings. Right now, what do you see kind of going on in the basketball side of things? Any visits, offers, things like that?
Yeah, so starting with the 2026 cycle here, Andrew, I think it's important to touch on the fact that back in December, UCLA landed their first commitment of the 2026 class, Javonte Floyd, a three-star center out of, I believe, Cedar Grove High School in Georgia, a talented player, obviously not the most highly touted recruit, but a solid first addition to the 2026 class for Cronin and company. And then from there, UCLA has also been pursuing several other players. And obviously, basketball recruiting, the field's a lot smaller than it is when we talk about football. There's a lot less players, so much more competitive recruitments. And Cronin himself has really kind of, I would say, deviated from pursuing that many high school recruits and has really relied on the transfer portal as of late. But nonetheless, they are still targeting a few other prospects in the 2026 class. One of those prospects being Christian Collins, a five-star player from California. He's a local kid, St. John Bosco, one of the top players in the class. I believe Rivals has him as the number 5 overall player in the entire 2026 class. This is a really talented power forward recruit, someone that I know that UCLA has been pursuing throughout the cycle. They hosted him on an official visit back in October. But again, this is a guy that's being pursued heavily by other schools. So USC and Kentucky are in the mix. He named UCLA, Kentucky, and USC as his top 3 schools a few months ago, but then in December, he reopened his recruitment, so it's been kind of hard to follow exactly what Collins is thinking. But Rivals' Joe Tipton recently predicted that he will ultimately land at USC, and Tipton's an insider. He has a 96% prediction rate, so it's more than likely that that's going to be a battle that UCLA will ultimately lose, which is a big blow to the class because, again, this is someone that Cronin and company have put a lot of time and resources into, and obviously missing out on him is going to make them have to pivot to other options. And one of those other options is Joe Philon, a 4-star power forward. So another wing. Again, this is a talented player, someone that UCLA has been pursuing for a few months. And now that Collins is kind of probably on the back burner for the Bruins, I would expect them to kind of go all out on Philon. And we've seen that in the past couple of weeks. They hosted him on a visit this week. And before that, he had named UCLA to his final 5 alongside Xavier, UNLV, Ohio State, and USF. So I think UCLA is probably in a really strong spot with Philon. Obviously, we're not there. We don't know exactly how his visit went this week, but I think if the visit went well, then UCLA could be in a very, very strong position to land Philon. And that kind of does it for the 2026 class. And then we can move on to 2027 if you would like as well.
Yeah, totally. But just like one question about, those 3 players you just named. Do you think Philon and Floyd are like 2 players that, Mick Cronin's hoping to get after, the Collins kind of stuff started to break down? Do you think those are like backup plans? Like those weren't the number 1 plans going in, or what do you think on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think, obviously no player that a team is actively pursuing is necessarily a backup plan. I think that if you're actively targeting a player, this is a player that you want to bring into your program and someone that your staff consensusly thinks would be a good fit into your system. So I think that Philon and Floyd were both players that early in their recruitments UCLA, liked and continued to pursue throughout the 2026 cycle. And we see that kind of culminating now with Floyd's commitment. I think Cronin probably really liked the defensive anchor that Floyd is at center. He has good size, a great frame. This is a guy that can really defend the paint at a high level. And I think that sort of play style, obviously, he's not going to be an offensive powerhouse when he gets to UCLA, but that's something that specifically the staff was targeting. So I wouldn't say it was a backup plan, but more so they're trying to find certain players who can do certain things within their system. I think that's more so what it is. And then in terms of Philon, I think that, yes, if they were targeting a wing, they obviously would have loved Collins. Like I said before, top 5 player in the class, highly talented. But again, recruitments can be so competitive. So I think I wouldn't say backup, but they definitely had places to pivot to. And I think Philon was one of their top places to pivot to.
Yeah, awesome. And I know he just had his visit on the 9th. His dad tweeted about it. I think, UCLA is looking good when all that being said. And then moving on to, 2027, I think two names that stick out to me: Navarro Bowman Jr., 4-star point guard, and then Jason Gardner Jr., also 4-star. It seems like UCLA is getting a little bit more traction. Do you have anything more on those two players?
Yeah. So like you said, they are gaining traction with both those guys. Both those guys have been on visits. Bowman was on a visit back in December. And UCLA is very high on him. And then Gardner was actually just on a visit here in January, at the end of January. I believe it was the 22nd, during that Purdue game that UCLA actually won. So that probably helped boost their standing a lot with that epic victory over the Boilermakers. But in terms of the 2027 class, especially in basketball, you're going to see these recruitments like very slow played, both by the schools and by the prospects. So these prospects are going to spend a lot of time getting to know the coaching staffs. They might go on a few unofficial visits during their junior seasons, like we're seeing right now. But then during their senior seasons, things are really going to start heating up in October and November of next year, ahead of the early national signing period. I would expect these guys to start taking official visits. And then most of the top players in the class will sign during that early signing period next November. So this is going to be a slow process on these guys. I think UCLA has made strong early impressions on both these guys, and will eventually, be in a position to compete for their recruitments as they continue to narrow down their decisions. But I really wouldn't expect any major progress to happen in Bowman or Gardner's recruitment over the next few months.
Gotcha. Yeah. So yeah, obviously both of them are guards. Are you starting to see more of a trend when it comes to what UCLA is targeting? Do you feel like, they were kind of being more balanced, or, they're really, positioning themselves to, address certain position groups more so than the others?
I think position is kind of, skewed, especially this early in the cycle. I think these are probably just two players that UCLA like their skill sets, and they're highly interested in them. But when it comes to, team needs, and I touched on this earlier, I think Cronin has really turned to the transfer portal for that. So if he needs players at a specific position, I think he's going to go heavy into the portal, and bring in a ton of guys, or not a ton of guys, but starting caliber players that can come in and play immediately for the Bruins. And then when he's targeting high school recruits, I really think he's targeting the guys that not only are, in his opinion, the most talented players, and also the fact that UCLA has a chance to land them, I think are both going to play a key factor into who he targets as a high school recruit. So I would look wouldn't look too deep into the position, and rather more so into the caliber player and how they will fit into UCLA's system.
Yeah, no, that's a pretty good strategy overall for Cronin. I know Donovan Dent was a big transfer for UCLA. Kind of earned his billing, inconsistent at times, but still outside of that, I think, the portal is the right move. Obviously, we saw Jamar Brown come in as well. But yeah, it's nice to see Cronin really taking initiative in the portal more. I know it's kind of hard, but UCLA wants to be a successful team, and they can fast track success more with the transfer portal, in my opinion. Obviously, recruits are important, but like you said, it's a very competitive process. And UCLA has a lot of competition elsewhere. The success hasn't really been there in the last couple of years, so it's harder to kind of reach out to these prospects in that way. But is there anything else you wanted to add for the basketball side of things before we kind of touch on to football?
I would just say, that, Phylon is probably the name that UCLA fans should be focused on most right now, especially with Collins certainly trending and going a different direction than UCLA. So I think that you'll see Cronin and his staff kind of continue to make this push for Phylon over the next few weeks. And yeah, I think they're in a solid position. Obviously, all of his top 5 that I mentioned earlier, all of those finalists will be in contention to land him. But I think getting him on campus for an official visit was a big step for Cronin and his staff in terms of this recruitment. And I think they could wrap it up, sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I totally agree. So yeah, moving on to football, has there been anything that's kind of popped up since the last time we visited? Any recruits that are more interested, things like that?
Yeah, so January was kind of this like volatile period. It's a contact period. So you saw a ton of offers being extended to these players. And just like a flurry of activity with junior days and all sorts of stuff like that. And now as we head into February, a lot of that's starting to slow down. We're entering a dead period. And what's happening now is players aren't in contact with staffs as frequently, but instead they're starting to think on their own timeline and start to make, or start to narrow down their decisions, start to schedule visits, and you're starting to see some activity with that. And that's all coming from what Chesney and his staff were able to accomplish in the month of January. So Mekhi Brown was someone that they offered back in January. This is a edge prospect in the 2027 class, a 4-star player, and a top 70 overall player in the country. Highly talented. His recruitment is going to be highly competitive, but UCLA offered him. They sent the defensive line coach, who I'm forgetting his name right now, unfortunately, out to Connecticut for a home visit with Brown. And now Brown has taken all of that information that he learned about UCLA over the last month and has now scheduled UCLA for a visit in the spring. So he'll be in Westwood this spring on April 29th. So he scheduled 10 visits. He's going to go see a ton of schools. These are not official visits. These are just spring visits. But he's going to go out. He's going to go to UNC, UCLA, South Carolina, Kentucky, Notre Dame, 10 total schools, and really trying to see which school he believes he fits in best at. And I think this is going to be a crucial period for UCLA in terms of their recruitment of Brown. They're going to be his last stop on this spring visit stretch. So if they can really make a strong impression on him, they should be able to position themselves as like a serious contender in his recruitment. And again, this is a guy who's, one of the top 70 players in the entire country. So an exciting time for UCLA fans, no doubt, in terms of Brown's recruitment. And then another player I wanted to highlight here was DeJohn Yarborough, an offensive lineman from Arizona, another 4-star prospect. I believe he's a top 400 overall player in the class. And he named UCLA in his top 10 alongside Alabama, Arizona State, Cal, Florida State, Kansas State, Minnesota, UCF, Washington, and Wisconsin. So he's originally from Minnesota. He transferred to Arizona, to Basha High School in Arizona at the start of his junior season, so ahead of the 2025 season. And has really started to, and West Coast schools have really started to gain a footing in his recruitment with that move from Minnesota to Arizona. And so UCLA was kind of starting to build a relationship with him once Chesney took over the program, and now they've made his top 10. So it's going to be, again, that's a competitive recruitment, but you're really the main point here, Andrew, is that you're starting to see these UCLA makes significant progress in these players' recruitments. They're starting to be finalists for these players. They're starting to be visit destinations for these players. And I think that's kind of the Chesney effect kind of happening here.
Yeah, no, the future definitely looks bright in Westwood when you kind of look at what UCLA has accomplished. But I kind of want to ask a question on Brown. You mentioned that he had a few schools that were after him. UCLA's last on the visit. Do you think UCLA has like any advantages over these teams? Obviously location, Chesney, that kind of things, but obviously UCLA is pretty far from Connecticut. So do you think that could be a factor in where he decides to ultimately go at the end of the cycle?
Yeah, I think that's certainly something to look at. Most of these teams that he is visiting are in the Midwest or on the East Coast. So that's something to consider. I think UCLA is actually his only true West Coast visit that he has scheduled. So that's a good point. That's something, that UCLA and Chesney will have to sell Brown on while he's out in Westwood. But again, there's no downside to bringing a player out to California because it's a beautiful place. Westwood's a beautiful campus. And I think you see players react to the atmosphere and the campus very well all the time when they go on visits. So obviously players a lot of the time want to be closer to home, but I think if UCLA can impress him in terms of everything football related, then the destination won't necessarily be a problem for them.
Right. And yeah, I totally agree. I think, it is a move for sure for that recruit. But you said also that UCLA was the last stop. Do you think being the last stop kind of offers any advantages, obviously fresh in the mind compared to a school like in the middle of, his trips? So do you think there's like any hope that could be a bigger factor when kind of recruiting Brown?
Yeah, I absolutely think that can be a big factor because, like you said, you're top of mind. So he's going on 10 visits this spring. That's a lot of information to take in about each program. And for UCLA to be the last, that's going to be the most fresh in his mind. That's going to be the coaching staff that spoke to him last. And I think that's certainly going to be a huge advantage. And the key thing about Brown is after this stretch of spring visits, he's expected to regroup, and then he's going to schedule official visits for the summer. So if UCLA can get their foot in the door during this stretch of spring visits and be one of those official visits teams later down the line, I think that's going to be massive in terms of their ability to ultimately land Brown.
Yeah, awesome. So yeah, I guess that's all I have for, the recent stuff. Is there anything else you'd like to add to kind of close things off?
No, I think it's just like I say, most weeks, it's an exciting time to be a UCLA fan. I think you have a lot of stuff going on, especially in the football world, a lot of changes happening to the program, and you're going to start to see recruits respond to those changes, most likely in a positive way, like we're starting to see. And I think, UCLA, especially on the football front, is going to be in a position to land some of the top talent in the country, and that's exciting for Bruins fans.
Awesome. Thank you again, Max, for coming on. It means a lot to me. I'm sure everyone listening really enjoys what you have to say. You're the expert on this kind of stuff. But that's all I really have today for this podcast. So again, thank you everyone who is listening right now. Again, thank you, Max. And as always, 4 is up and have a good day.